Chapter 1. Ring. A phone goes off. Hello? Detective Tate here. Yes, good evening, Detective. We have a woman who's been shot in the head and was pronounced dead. They need you down there on the scene, 625 Walnut Lane. The voice on the other end says. Okay, I will be there shortly, Tate replies. Detective William Tate, a rookie in the homicide unit, had just passed the exam, and this would be his first case as a homicide detective. He was home with the family, ready to have dinner when he got the call. He walks to the bedroom and begins to get dressed. A smooth-dressing man. Everything he wears is tailor-fitted to his body to show off his muscular physique. At 5'11", with a medium build, dark brown hair, and a face the ladies love, he slips on a dark blue Armani suit and sprays on his cologne, Guilty by Gucci. He clicks his badge to his belt and puts his newly issued Glock 9 in his holster. He then walks into the kitchen where his wife is. Honey, I've been called in. His wife Liz rolls her eyes and replies, But honey, you haven't eaten your dinner yet. I know, Tate replies. I guess I'll just have to take it with me. This is my first homicide case. You know I can't mess this up, honey. I know, honey. Knock 'em dead, she says. Really, Liz? Knock 'em dead? Tate replies and chuckles. What? She replies and smiles. You know I didn't mean it that way. She then winks and blows Tate a kiss. Tate takes in her humor and smiles. His wife always knows how to make him laugh. On the way out the front door, he stops and gives his son Jack a kiss, then looks at himself in the mirror hanging near the front door and says to himself, If looking good was a crime, I'd be facing the death penalty. Tate opens the front door, then looks back at his wife Liz, who is now standing in the living room holding Jack, and says, Don't wait up. Numbers dialing. The phone is now ringing. Tate waits for an answer. Hello, Detective Barnes. Barnes is the opposite of Tate. He is a vet who has been on the force for 16 years, with 10 years as a detective in the homicide unit. Back home, things aren't so peachy with Barnes. He is in the middle of a divorce and a nasty custody battle. Barnes devotes all of his time to work and assisting other detectives with murder cases. He is one of the best detectives in the homicide unit. Tate is excited to be working with Barnes. Yeah, this is Tate. I'm heading over to the Walnut Lane homicide. Okay, Barnes says. Me too, so I'll see you there. Meanwhile, the scene on Walnut Lane is ugly, especially for the area. Crime rarely happens in this part of the city. Emotions are running high from neighbors and bystanders. Cops swarm the scene, and red flashing lights are everywhere. A few minutes later, a black 2005 Taurus pulls up to the scene with a flashing light coming from the windshield. The car comes to a stop, and Detective Tate steps out and walks up to the crime scene. The responding officers on the scene walk up to Tate. I'm not getting anything from this guy. He was here when I pulled up, just sitting on the steps. Okay, I will take it from here. Let me know when Detective Barnes arrives, please. Tate is now kneeling over, examining the body as evidence from around the body is being gathered. Tate hears his name being called. Officer Tate. Tate turns around to see Barnes making his way through the commotion with 2 cups of coffee, black. He knew it would be a long night, so he hands Tate a cup and takes a deep breath. So, what do we have? So far, not much, Tate says. Just a woman appearing to be in her 30s. Gunshot wound to the head. We have a potential suspect outside in a patrol car, and I haven't gone through the house yet. I was waiting on you. Barnes smiles. Well, let's check the house. You have gloves, right? Make sure you're not leaving any fingerprints. I'd hate to have to take you in for homicide. Tate laughs and pulls out some gloves. Well, I'm going to see what I can get out of this potential suspect. See if maybe we can't wrap this up tonight. I doubt it, Tate responds. He is not giving me anything right now. Tate walks to a nearby room as Jack walks back out the front door, sipping his coffee. He makes his way to the marked patrol car where Mark, the suspect, is sitting. Barnes opens the driver's side door and asks the suspect to step out the car. Hello, sir. My name is Detective Barnes. Can I have your name? Mark just looks up at Jeff with tears in his eyes. It was an accident, Mark says. Jeff replies, I'm sure it was. Can you tell me what happened? And just like that, Mark is mute again. Barnes! Tate is yelling from a distance. Come look at this. Tate ducks back in the house once he is sure Barnes has heard him. Sir, we will be talking again shortly. Barnes instructs the suspect to sit back in the car and closes the door. Barnes can tell something isn't right with Mark. He looks out in the street, where there is still a huge crowd, grabs his coffee, and proceeds back to the house to assist Tate. What you got, rookie? He asks as he pats Tate on the back. Tate shows Jeff family pictures. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this isn't the same guy, is it? Jeff looks at the pictures. No, I don't think so. It doesn't look like it. Tate stares at more pictures. Well, judging by the ring on her left finger, she's married. That leads me to believe this guy in the pictures is her husband. So my question is, who is the suspect to the victim, and why was he here? Tate starts to pace the floor. There seems to be nothing missing and no signs of forced entry. Jeff looks at Tate, and they both reply at the same time. Her lover. This looks like an affair gone bad. There has to be someone who saw or heard something. Someone that could possibly tell us what led to this. Tate says, with a very confused tone. Tate proceeds to walk outside to see if he can get some info from a neighbor. Excuse me, does anyone know the couple that lives here? Tate hears a very faint voice say, Yes. Who said that? Tate yells, while looking into the crowd. Approaching Tate is a small elderly woman who looks to be in her early 70s. Yes, I live next door. Tate lifts the yellow tape to let the woman through. So, you say you know the couple, ma'am? Yes, she responds. Not that well, but I'm familiar with them. Okay, miss. My name is Detective Tate, and I'm investigating this case. I would like to ask you a few questions if that's okay with you. That's fine, she says, still shaken up by the events that took place. Is there anywhere that we can go and talk? Tate asks. We can go to my house. I don't mind. Okay, miss. Lead the way, says Tate, as he reaches out his hand to give her the leeway. Barnes is still standing outside the house, waiting for Tate to finish questioning the neighbor, when he catches eye contact with the suspect a few times from the car. He continues to sip his coffee. Nice and strong. Just how I like it. Back at the neighbor's house, Tate is sitting on a couch covered with plastic. He smiles to himself as he thinks of how his grandmother used to have plastic on her couch. As a kid, he loved sitting on it because it made a crunchy sound every time he moved. Snapping out of nostalgia, he notices cats clinging to his ankle. Would you like something to drink, Detective? The elderly woman says from the kitchen. Tate lifts his cup of coffee and says, No, thank you, I'm fine. Humming tunes from an old Beatles record, the woman enters the living room where Tate is seated, holding a cup of homemade tea mixed with lemons and honey. She takes a sip of the tea and begins volunteering information. Oh dear, did that couple have problems? Fight after fight, argument after argument, almost every day, especially lately. Tate nods his head, indicating the elderly woman to go on. Excuse me, miss. I didn't get your name for the record. Dorothy. Dorothy Jacobs. Mrs. Dorothy, or Mrs. D as everyone called her, was the nosy neighbor everyone loved. She had a good heart, and if anyone wanted to know anything, she was the one to go to. Mrs. Dorothy wasn't always like that. She used to keep to herself until her husband died a few years back from a heart attack. Her husband was an all-around American war vet in the U.S. Army. And from the looks of the pictures and medals of honor around the house, Tate could grasp that he was a high-ranking officer. After his death, she was now alone in the house they once shared. Her kids and grandkids often stopped by to keep her company. The rest of the time, she stayed home, working on her garden and knitting to pass the time. Tate was now at the edge of the sofa, leaning towards Mrs. Jacobs with his notepad. "Tell me what you know about the couple?" Tate asked. "Well, they moved in over a year ago from what I remember. They seemed to be happy for the most part, but recently, I started noticing a slight change in their behavior toward each other. Nothing serious, nothing I would call the cops for. I remember one day I was out back in my yard when I heard some yelling from their kitchen. Shortly after, Ralph stormed out the back door." Ralph is the husband, correct? Mrs. Jacobs nodded. Tate made a memo of the husband's name in his notepad. Mrs. Dorothy continued. "I asked Ralph what was wrong. He said that it was just normal stuff couples go through. I told him that it didn't sound normal. He had a tear in his eye, so I knew it was more than what he was leading on. He lit a cigarette and asked me how he could fix his marriage. I told him, you can't fix it alone. You both have to want to. He smiled and said maybe you're right. Then he told me goodnight and went back to his house." "Do you think Ralph wanted his wife dead?" Tate asked bluntly. Mrs. Jacobs was taken aback. She murmured, "Oh, no, Detective. He loved her. Once he went back in the house, they must have kissed and made up because I didn't hear anything else from them the rest of the night." "When did you see Ralph after that?" Tate inquired. "The next morning, I saw him leaving for work. He said good morning, got in his car, and pulled out of the driveway. See, Mr. Bennett worked a lot. Every time I would see him, he would be going to work or coming home from work. That's a lot of working for one man." "Do you think he was cheating on his wife?" "It's hard to say, sweetie. Anything is possible. I just know that wife of his was sneaky. She kind of rubbed me the wrong way that same morning when he left for work. Maybe 2 hours later, a white car pulled into the driveway," Mrs. Jacobs told Tate. Tate thought to himself, could that be the same car that's in the driveway now? She continued. "A white, stocky male, about 5'8", stepped out of the car with the baseball cap on." It dawned on Tate that the man she had seen had to be the same man they had in the patrol car. Right then, he knew this same man had been at this house before. Mrs. Jacobs told Tate that he hadn't been there any more than an hour or so. "Okay, ma'am. Thank you. That's all I need for now. If I have any more questions or you remember anything else that may help me, give me a call," he said, while handing her an off-white business card that read, "Detective William Tate, Homicide Unit. I may need you to come down to the station to identify the man we have in custody." "Sure thing, Detective." Mrs. Jacobs continued. "I hope I was of help to you, Detective." "You did what was right, ma'am. I will be in touch." On his way out the door, he turned around and asked her one more question. "By the way, you wouldn't know where the husband is now, would you?" "The heck if I know. 9 times out of 10, he's at work." "Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Enjoy your night." "I will, once you guys get all these cars out of here." They both laughed, and Tate proceeded to make his way back to the crime scene to join Jeff. "Oh, shit," Tate said to himself. "Now there are fucking reporters everywhere." In this small section of the city, there was hardly any crime. So when something like a murder suddenly happens, it's normal for people to be afraid and overwhelmed. As Tate strolled back to the crime scene, a reporter ran up to him holding a microphone. "Excuse me, officer. I have a few questions for you. My name is Amy Dash. I'm a reporter for Channel 6. Do you have a minute?" "Move, lady. Stick that mic up someone else's ass. I'm busy." Tate moved her to the side and kept it moving. "Okay, detective. I will get my story one way or another. Hey, you, the camera guy. Get off your ass. We got a job to do." The cameraman stood up and grabbed his camera. "How do I look?" Amy said. "Is my hair fine?" "Yes, Miss Dash," Amy replied. "Make sure you get my good side." "As you wish, Miss Dash." He lifted his camera and counted down from 5. As soon as the camera guy gave her the signal, Amy looked into the camera and said, "Reporting live. Hello, this is Amy Dash, reporting live from the crime scene where a woman was shot to death in her home early this afternoon. Witnesses say that a young man was sitting on the steps when police arrived. As you can see behind me, the police have the scene secured. Hold on." Placing her hand on her earpiece, she continued. "Yes, I've just received the name of the woman. Jessica Bennett, 36, was living here with her husband, Ralph Bennett. Witnesses also say that the couple had problems in the past. Police have someone in custody, but have not yet released a name, so it's unclear whether the man they have in custody is the husband. We know that the couple has been living here for over a year. What's that, John?" She looked to the side while on a call with the correspondent from the news station. "No, John. Right now, police and detectives are keeping all information confidential, including the motive. Okay, John, back to you." Amy stood with a serious face. "Clear," the cameraman said as he put his camera down, walked to the van, and packed up. "Okay, I need a better story. Who can I sleep with around here for this story?" Amy said to herself. Meanwhile, outside the house, Detectives Barnes and Tate were having a brief conversation. "Hello," Amy yelled from the other side of the yellow tape. "Are you going to give me my story?" Tate took a deep sigh. "Why won't she go away?" "Calm down, William. She's just a reporter trying to get a story," Barnes said as he signaled the officer to let her in. "Thank you. My God," Amy said as she walked past the uniformed officer. "So, guys, what do we got here?" "You are interfering with an investigation," said Tate in a stern voice, and he walked away. "What the fuck is up his ass?" Barnes laughed. "Nothing. He's new to homicide. He's just trying to stick to the book." "Well, someone should teach him how to talk to a lady," said Amy. "Okay, ma'am. What is it that you want?" asked Barnes. "I want in on this case." "Well, ma'am, I can't give any information until we have all the facts. You should know that." "Well, I'm looking forward to working with you, handsome." Barnes blushed. "Well, when I know something, so will you." "Okay, I can work with that. What's your name? I know you don't want me to call you detective all the time." "It's Jeffrey Barnes." "Okay, Barnes. Here's my card. My name is Amy. Give me a call so we can go over the details." "I will keep that in mind, Amy," Barnes replied. Amy walked off, and Barnes stood there as she walked away, checking out her frame. "Man, she is wearing that dress," he thought to himself. "Tell your partner to lighten up," she yelled. Tate walked up to Barnes and gave him a light shove. "Pay attention. We got work to do," he said. The scene was secured as evidence was being collected. Jessica's body was being taken from the house. The neighbors watched as the coroners carried her lifeless body out on a stretcher, zipped in a black body bag. "Oh my God!" one neighbor cried out as she covered her eyes. Tate walked over to the car Mark was sitting in. He opened the back door of the patrol car and grabbed Mark from under his arm. "Watch your head. I need you to come down to the station and answer some questions," Tate advised as he shoved Mark into the back seat of his car and slammed the car door shut. "Where are you going?" Barnes asked. "I'm going back to the station with the suspect." "All right. I'm going to finish up here and meet you back at the station, okay?" Barnes walked off, and Tate got into the driver's seat, closed the door, and pulled off. Lights flashing from his windshield signaled the other officers on the scene that he was trying to leave, and they cleared the way. Tate left the scene, took his foot off the brakes, and continued straight to Walnut Lane. A few blocks away, Tate reached a red light on the corner of Broad and Chestnut. He looked in his rearview mirror at Mark and asked, "Are you ready to talk?" "I've done nothing wrong," Mark answered. "It was an accident." "So that's what you're sticking to? That's your story?" Mark stopped talking and just sat quietly in the back seat, knowing if he said more without a lawyer, he would be in deeper trouble. So he remained silent. "We're here," Tate said. Mark looked out the back window, seeing patrol cars lined up and reporters waiting out front, trying to catch anyone with information about the case. Tate took the back way in, where criminals are normally brought in from. He walked Mark into the building and said, "You're a famous man. Have a seat." Mark sat down on the bench in the closed-off hallway. Tate opened a lockbox on the wall, put his gun in the box, and locked it. He brought Mark back to his feet and walked him through the steel door into a lockup room attached to holding cells. "So, you are the guy," the officer said at the nearby desk. "You can put him in interrogation room 1. He instructed Tate. Tate asked Mark, "Do you have anything on you that I should know about?" Mark continued not to say anything to Tate. He was searched and then put in the interrogation room. Tate walked to the desk where the officer was sitting and said, "I will be back for him once my partner gets here." "Say no more," the booking officer said to Tate. Tate opened the side door and walked up 2 flights to the homicide unit. His office was in the back, and he sat at his desk, leaning back, looking at pictures, and started to think deeply. Barnes arrived and yelled, "Where's Tate?" "In his office," one detective replied. Barnes walked into Tate's office and took a seat on the opposite side of his desk. "Did our guy start talking yet?" "Not much. He just keeps saying it was an accident," Tate replied. "Yeah, he said the same thing to me outside the house." Barnes leaned back in the chair with his hands behind his head and said, "That's why we're the detectives, to get to the truth." Their conversation was interrupted by a ringing phone. Barnes grabbed the phone and said, "Detective Tate's office." It was Ralph on the other line, sounding nervous and curious, as if he was guilty of the murder. "Yes, this is Detective Barnes here. Who am I speaking to?" "Ralph Bennett, Jessica's husband," Ralph replied. Jeff covered the phone and said to Tate, "This is the husband on the line." Tate leaned forward and said, "Put him on speaker." "Hello, Mr. Bennett? We've been trying to reach you. We need you to come down to the station, sir." "I was at work when I got the call. I'm sorry." "No need to apologize, sir. But we do need you to come down to the station so we can ask you a few questions. We have someone in custody. Maybe you've seen him before." Tate whispered to Jeff, "Ask him what time he'll be here." Barnes inquired, "Mr. Bennett, do you have a time when you're going to be here?" Ralph answered, "Well, I have to ID my wife's body. When I'm done with that, I can come down after." Okay, sir. I'll see you shortly then, Barnes replied, hanging up the phone. Tate turned to Barnes and asked, What about our suspect? Have one of the officers in booking bring him up to the interview room, Barnes instructed. Tate called down to booking. Yeah, we're ready for the suspect. Bring him to interview room 1. Tate then looked at Barnes and said, So I'm doing all the work? Bingo, hotshot. You're the rookie. It's time to break you in, Barnes teased. He laughed and added, I'm going to sit and watch and see if I can read him. So don't worry, rookie. You'll be just fine. Just don't mess it up.